Hey, Stewart Chapel, this is Don Pierson, and Don Counts is back with me today, and I really appreciate him being here. This is Wednesday, March the 2nd devotion, and I probably need to let you know, at this point, when I finish this series, In the Presence of Predators, and there's about 6 or 7 more of them, when I finish this series, my plan is to be done with the devotions for a while. And so let me tell you a little bit of history. Those of you that have been with me all along in these devotions know that we started them back when COVID first started and was a way to stay in contact with my people, God's people, and that's what they started. Well, that pretty much is done with, and we're thinking, Don and I have been talking, that this will probably be the last series. Now, I know some of you watch all the time, and if I can hear from you to let me know whether, what you think, we may reconsider. It's just that it takes a lot of time to do the devotions, a lot of study time, a lot of time doing them, and then a lot of time for Don to have to put them on every day. And I'm thinking that now that we're past the COVID thing, I can probably put my energies towards others' preparation. But I do know that God's been using this in some of your life, and so I would appreciate hearing from you, and may reconsider this. All right? Well, we're on the series, In the Presence of Predators. I'm going to take you through a journey through Acts chapter 13 through 15, and talking about how predators can be relentless. Now, I don't know what your familiarity is with Acts. Acts chapter 13 is right there is when Paul and Barnabas are sent out by the church of Antioch. And so from chapter 13 through 15, it records their first missionary journey. And then we read this in chapter 15, verse 36. We read this. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord, and see how they are doing." So let's go back and see how they are doing. So they've come to the end of their first missionary journey, and now they're going to go back. Well, all along, literally, basically from the very beginning of their first missionary journey, there has been a consistency of predators trying to hinder and stop and just to try to kill, devour their work. And so, if you don't mind, I'm going to pick up my book and I'll just share with you a little bit of that journey. And so, in chapter 13, verse 8 through 12, they encounter a sorcerer, a man that has power over one of their cities, and they cast this man out. But this man still, even after the demon is cast out, the man still has a hunger for possessions. And so this predator is probably common to many of us. I mean, God may deliver us, but the hunger or the drive for possession sometimes can hinder it. And so one of the predators is often ourselves. Our desire for more of stuff can hinder us from what God desires, can be a predator. We can be our own predator in that. In chapter 13, verses 44 through 49, we read these words. Let me share those words with you. Chapter 13, 44 through 49. Actually, just verse 45. "But when the Jews saw the multitudes, they were filled with envy, and contradicting and blaspheming, they opposed the things spoken by Paul." You see, one group is glorifying God because of what God is doing. The other group is envious and jealous, and they this is the first time they come out of their shells and they reveal their heads, they reveal their direction. Now, this enemy, these Jewish religious group of people, are going to haunt Paul and Barnabas all the way, not only through this journey, but all the way to the end of Paul's life. It is driven by jealousy, and envy is the culprit. It wasn't religiosity or the desire for religiousness that drove them. They are jealous and envy of what God is doing through Paul and Barnabas. When we come to this idea of divide or conquer, we're in Acts chapter 14, verse 1 through 7. And there it says in verse 2, but the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brethren. So they're driven by jealousy and they begin to blaspheme. They appear again, and this time they poison the minds of other Christians in order to divide and conquer. The enemy will do that. He'll come into the midst of good people, and he'll poison their minds so that he divides and conquer. So, one is driven by possessions. Others are driven by jealousy. Others are driven by power and really want some power and control. We move down in through Acts, and we come to Acts chapter 14, verse 19. And it says, then Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there, and having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. However, when the disciples gathered around, he rose up and went into the city. And the next day he departed with Barnabas to Debri. These enemies are relentless. They come from the other cities following them. Again, they're very religious. They're Jewish people. They're driven by jealousy. They're driven by a hunger for power. They come and they pursuing with evil, even physical harm, stoning. We must choose. We must choose God's glory. We must choose to be possessed by God. We must choose to not be more than conquerors, and we must choose the path of righteousness. The other thing, the next step in Acts is found in chapter 15, verse 1. Listen to what it says. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Now, you see the progression? These Jewish religious leaders, they are relentless in following Paul and Barnabas. Every city they go to, they're doing their very best. Deal with what possesses you, which should be God, jealousy and envy, power for control. The other one, now they're vicious, they're out of control, stoning. But here, it's all about legalism. It's all about religion versus a relationship. And they're driven by a religion, so they throw in legalism now, something else that you have to do in order to be saved, that Jesus isn't enough. Paul deals with this. And then there's the last description is found in chapter 15, verse 36 and 41. And it's where Paul and Barnabas must decide about Mark. But Paul insisted that they should not take Mark with them, the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Then the contention or division became so sharp that they parted from one another, and so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. And so now the enemy is in between Paul and Barnabas. No longer is it just outside of them seeking to destroy the work of God. Now it's between them. Now, Paul remains relentless. He will not take Mark. He has good reasons. He believes he has good reasons. Barnabas, on the other hand, says, you need to give the guy another chance. Paul is not going to give him another chance. Now, you need to understand, Paul is black and white. Paul is a believer. He's very strong. He's the preacher of the group, but everything's black and white for Paul. And Barnabas is too gray. Mark is too gray. And so Paul doesn't want to have anything to do with this gray because everything's black and white. He feels like Mark already abandoned them, so he's not going to choose them. But the problem, the contention or the division comes between Barnabas and Paul. So much so that they decide to go separate ways. Pride or humility. I want to tell you something. Pride is a lot easier for me. I think pride is just seems to come natural for man. Humility is not good. I don't even know what that looks like half the time. In fact, I don't even know whether we know what it looks like. We talk about it looking like Jesus, but sometimes I see Jesus strong, bold, unmovable, steadfast. So, be honest with you, I think man its pride comes natural for us. I don't think we really know what humility is, but I do know this. Barnabas knew more about humility than Paul. And that's interesting because Barnabas doesn't write a single word of Scripture. God chooses Paul. Now what happens, years, decades later, there's going to be a change. And decades later, Paul is going to humble himself, and he's going to recognize that he did need Mark, and he calls Mark to his side. The enemy is relentless, and what you can tell by our just journey through chapter 13, 14, and 15 is that the enemy takes various forms. Sometimes he looks like us. Love you, Stuart Chapel.